Hi, Nikki.
Do you want me to be a backup, help out?
You bet. I admitted a bunch of people. I think Garth is also going to watch and admit people as we go along.
Okay.
If we just wait a couple more minutes here and make sure everyone's on that wants to be. Happy Monday, everybody.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Maybe we're getting close. We'll wait till about 5 after. All right, maybe we ought to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for hopping in here. My name is John Miller, and today we're going to go through some producer practice implementation and reimbursement questions and scenarios that are out there. And we'll have some sort of detailed scenarios where I'll go through what it would be like when you meet the producer out in the field and what their needs are, and then how you would implement that practice through this program, and then how you would submit their cost for reimbursement. So we'll give some, I'll give some very specific types of examples. Just to start out here, there's a little bit of a update and clarification from the grant guidelines webinar, which was 2 weeks ago. We've had a little bit of change from the USDA for our climate smart commodity dollars, and we will now we have to do the FSA paperwork every year that the producer receives payments through this program. So this is a little bit different than, say, EQIP or federal programs where they have one determination in the year they sign up, and then they don't have to redetermine throughout the life of the contract. With climate smart commodities, they're going to have folks go into the FSA each year. So each year that they receive funds, so that's going to be 3 years that they'll be receiving funds, and they'll need to go in there and refill out the paperwork or update it. Some of that can be done online, but that's something they probably need to talk to the FSA about, as I am not an expert on this kind of thing. But the thing to remember, first and foremost, they will not be receiving funds in fiscal year 2023, since the federal fiscal year changes at October 1st. They will start receiving funds in fiscal year 2024. So that is the first year that they will need to do that FSA paperwork, meaning they will have to get into the FSA after October 1st to fill out that paperwork. So I guess that's quite a bit different from how it was, how we had defined it in the grant guidelines when we went through them 2 weeks ago. We were saying that they could begin filling that paperwork out pretty much as soon as possible. We'd like you to start doing their enrollment packages as soon as you get your contracts, but they will not be able to go into the FSA and fill out their FSA paperwork until after October 1st, 2023 for a determination in the fiscal year 2024. FSA does temporarily close down when the fiscal year rolls over. So there might be a week or two of time in there when they are unable to get that paperwork done. So they need to contact the FSA office first and see when they can get in there to fill out the paperwork for FY 2024. We're still asking for the enrollment packages and the subsidiary prints, which are the printout of their FSA paperwork. We're still asking for all that to be submitted by November 15th of 2023. So you probably would be well advised to begin their enrollment process. Once you get your contracts, don't wait until after October 1st and start getting those folks enrolled and go through the initial consultations and discussions with them about what they want to do. And then just let them know that they're going to have to get in there after October 1st and before November 15th to fill out that FSA paperwork in the FSA office. Producers will have to do this determination every fall. So as I said, after October 1st, this year they'll have to do it after October 1st of 2023, next year after October 1st of 2024, and the following year after October 1st of 2025. Again, I think that those subsequent years, they can just do an update to their paperwork, which may be able to be done online, but that's something they need to clarify with the FSA. And then upcoming webinar that we have, the next one scheduled will be August 7th. So that's 2 weeks from now on Monday at 11 o'clock. And we will be doing a contract question and answer session. At that point, many of you will have contracts out to you for either for review or for signature. So we're anticipating you might be running into questions with those contracts, and we'd like to give you a webinar specifically to ask questions about them and get them answered by our team. And then after that, hopefully the next one, but we're not 100% sure on the date yet, we will have a technical assistance provider introduction webinar where we're going to get you together with the technical assistance providers around the state and do some introductions of who those people are and what areas they'll be covering. And then coming up probably in September and October, we have some other webinars we're working on. We'll have a cover crop panel webinar where we'll get some folks maybe from some of the seed companies and some people who are familiar with implementing cover crops in different types of cropping systems. And we'll get them together for a panel to discuss cover crop implementation on people's farms and how we can best serve our producers by helping them with that implementation. We're going to have a compost webinar where, again, we have several folks talking about compost, including people from the Colorado Compost Council. They'll be talking to us about bridging the gap between food waste compost, which there's quite a bit of this, and how producers can get access to this for application at on their operations. And then we'll have some people that are familiar with compost application practices that will also speak at that webinar. And then we'll have a specific compostee webinar where we're going to talk about extracting compost, what kind of equipment it takes and how people do it, and what some of the best management practices are for that practice. So again, today I'm going to talk specifically about practice implementation through this Climate Smart Commodities grant and how that's going to work. And there's probably even going to be, there's definitely going to be questions. I'm sure you all have questions. Let's go ahead and feel free to raise your hand and we'll address them, or put them into the chat box and we can address them as we go along or near the end. And then, as always, you can email the cda_soil@state.co.us email address with your questions later on as they come up, and we will be glad to tackle them one by one. You can also bring them to that Q&A on August 7th. It is sort of for the contracting specifically, but I think we'll probably have time in there to answer other questions as well. So you can sort of save them up if you have ones or if they come up later on. So to start out here, I'm going to talk about our CPA 52 exempt practices, or what we're calling the fast track. During your enrollment process with your producers, they will need to pick at least one new practice to implement on their enrolled star field for at least 3 years. So they're committing to 3 years of a new practice, something they haven't done so far, that they want to try. So something that they're willing to experiment with. They can pick more than one practice, but if they are specifying that they're picking more than one practice, they need to let us know on in the enrollment package. When you're out there meeting with them for the initial consultation, you need to gather that information from them. And they need to, if they're picking more than one practice, again, they need to be committing to those practices for at least 3 years. These practices must be tied to one of the 5 principles of soil health. So if they come up with interesting new practice, like, and it's something out of our list, like tree and shrub planting or pruning, sorry, we want to know why that practice is tied to soil health. So we don't, just because the practice is on our list, we would rather not have them just out there using soil health money for tree and shrub pruning. We'd like to know what they're doing with those prunings that might be helping their soil health. So are they mulching them, grinding them up, mulching them, and applying them as mulch to their trees or other crops or something like that? In that case, then we would consider that to be a new soil health practice. But if they're just doing tree and shrub pruning and it has nothing to do with soil health, then it's not going to work out. So we need them to be tied to one of the 5 principles of soil health. And all 2023 producers that are enrolling under Climate Smart Commodities Grant are, that are enrolling this year, all 2023 producers will be enrolling under the Climate Smart Commodities Grant and are therefore subject to federal requirements to receive their funds. However, and this is the really great part of what's happening, some practices are exempt from CPA 52 requirements, meaning no cultural resource surveys or environmental assessments will be required if the producers choose things from this list that you see here. So these are some of the most common soil health practices and some of the most common STAR Plus practices that we saw in the last year being brought into, that are being implemented. And that would include conservation cover, conservation crop rotation, residue and tillage management, where people are converting to no-till, soil carbon amendment, cover cropping, residue and tillage management, where people are reducing their till, mulching, forest harvest management, prescribed grazing, row arrangement, strip cropping, nutrient management, and tree and shrub pruning. So again, if they pick one of these things out of this list, or several of the things out of this list, there will be no requirements for CPA 52 here. There are some caveats to the CPA 52 exemption. In order for people to stay on this fast track, their field must have been cropped or grazed within the last year or 4 out of the past 7 years. So in other words, they can't be sod busting. It has to be a crop system that's already been happening last year or 4 out of the past 7 years. They can't be bringing new ground into this. No change of land use will occur as a result of these practices. There will be no construction or activities occurring below the plow zone. So this is a key one here, and why some of our processes are, or practices are exempt and some are not. So they're assuming, cover crop plantings and things like that are not going below the plow zone. Reimbursement is being requested for multiple practices and includes a non-exempt practice. So let's say the producer does choose a conservation cover, but they also choose fencing, which is a non-exempt practice. They will then have to go through the CPA 52 requirements for both of those practices, the non-exempt and the exempt. So it will nullify the exemption of the original practice. The proposed practice must not violate federal or other applicable laws and requirements for the protection of the environment and cultural resources. So that one's kind of pretty self-explanatory. And the producer must be made aware that they should instantly stop all activities associated with the STAR Plus program if they discover any negative impacts to public health, ecological damage, potential harm of an endangered species, or if they see damage to historic properties or cultural resources. Now, this is what we're calling the not as fast track. These are the non-exempt practices. Each of these practices, if a producer chooses something on this list, they will require site-specific reviews, including field surveys. The site-specific reviews will be completed by a third-party contractor selected by the USDA with assistance from CDA staff. We will work to process all these as quickly as possible, but there will be factors outside of CDA control. So at this point, we don't know exactly how long it will take to get CPA 52 approval on these practices. So if the producers choose things on this list, we cannot give them a determined definite time frame on how long it will take before they are reimbursed for these practices. And it's kind of a long list. I won't go through the entire thing, but fencing is on here. So any type of fencing, hard fencing and cross fencing, the only type of fencing exempt from this is virtual fencing, which I'll talk about in a little while. But any type of standard fencing is going to require that site-specific review. Other things of note would be rangeland plantings, pasture and hay plantings. Those things are going to require a site-specific review. So now I'm going to go into some specific requirements for a few of the practices. Some of them we're going to ask for a little bit more info from you guys to capture out there. So for soil carbon amendments, compost and biochar applications, they will be CPA 52 exempt practices, so they'll be on the fast track. But the CDA will require the following documentation be attached to all reimbursement requests. So if someone's going to apply compost or biochar, we need a current soil test done prior to application that meets NRCS reporting requirements. So we want to know what their soil is like before they apply the compost or biochar. We would need a laboratory analysis of the compost or biochar that meets our NRCS reporting requirements. So in other words, most compost companies are going to be, usually have some type of analysis of their composts that people can get when they buy the compost. And it'd be similar for people buying biochar from a company. So we would need that paperwork showing what's in that compost and what's in that biochar. If the people are making the compost or biochar themselves, they're going to need to send it off for a test, which is a relatively inexpensive test. And they can include the cost of that test for their reimbursement. So that should be noted. And then we need a description of how the application rate was determined. So they have a soil test, they have an analysis of the compost. How did they decide how much compost they're going to apply to that field? And how that timing, the application rate and timing will accomplish their stated goal of soil health improvement. And then just a quick note, carbon amendment application quantities should not exceed those recommended by the U.S. Compost Council or applicable industry practice. So we want to avoid people making grossly over applying these amendments, but that seems to be fairly rare with compost and biochar. So this is probably not a huge problem, but it is worth noting. We want to make sure there's no over application that could lead to runoff to Colorado waterways. All these requirements here, the current soil test, the laboratory analysis, and the description of how and when they're applying the compost and biochar can just be included in the email when you're submitting their reimbursement. Our second specific practice note is for nutrient management. So fertilizer and manure applications will be CPA 52 exempt practices, meaning they won't need a site-specific surveys, but the CDA will require the following documentation be attached to all reimbursement requests. Again, we need a current soil test done prior to application that meets all NRCS reporting requirements. We need an analysis of the fertilizer or manure to be applied that meets all NRCS reporting requirements. For fertilizer, that should just be the information that comes with the fertilizer when it's purchased. And for manure, they may have to submit that for a test. Again, those tests are pretty quick, and the cost of that test can be added to their reimbursement request. And then we need a description of how the application rate was determined, the application timing, and how this application rate and timing will help to accomplish the stated goal of soil health improvement. Again, note the nutrient application quantity should not exceed land grant university guidance. So in this case, CSU or industry practice. And then all nutrient application must be done in accordance with applicable laws. So once again, we don't want people applying nutrients in a real gross over application scenario where we have to worry about nutrients being washed into rivers and et cetera. And then in my final specific, oh, well, it's not my final, there's two more. Specific practice note is for prescribed grazing and virtual fencing. Virtual fencing is CPA 52 exempt. We're going to lump it under the prescribed grazing practice. It will not be under the fencing practice. So if people want to do virtual fencing, they want to go ahead and indicate that they want to do prescribed grazing, virtual fencing in their enrollment when you're going through the enrollment with them. And in order for them to do prescribed grazing and virtual fencing, we must have a grazing management plan. So they're going to need to, if they don't have one already, they're going to need to develop one. And then the producer and conservation district / entity must provide details about this grazing management plan in the producer enrollment package. And then they should report any changes to the plan in the yearly check-in forms. These details should include the acreage of the entire management area, not just the field they're enrolling in Star Plus. These details, the timing of their grazing events, how the enrolled field fits into this management plan, their herd sizes, and any other relevant information that would be associated with the area covered by the proposed virtual fencing. So since this is a CPA 52 exempt practice and we don't have to have those specific field surveys, we would encourage you to actually enroll larger acreages here. You're already going to have to be doing the grazing management plan for larger acreages, not just, let's say if we have they have a 60-acre field that they were going to enroll. Obviously that field most likely would not be the entirety of their grazing management plan. I guess it depends on how many animals they have and what kind of animals they are. But for like a cattle operation, 60 acres isn't going to get you real far. So that they might have a much larger area that's in that grazing management plan. So we'd ask you to enroll more acreage there, since they don't have to go through the cultural resource surveys and all the stuff for that larger acreage. So that it would help us to capture which areas we are affecting more with more detail. And then all other fencing materials, including hot wires and temporary fencing, will fall under the fencing practice and will not be exempt from CPA 52 requirements. And again, that's because typically fencing has, when people put in hard fencing, they go below the plow line, and that could potentially impact cultural resources that are buried in the ground. And cross fencing can impact endangered species. So the virtual fencing is exempt from CPA 52 requirements, but all other fencing is not. And then the final practice note here is species reporting. So reimbursement requests for plantings must be accompanied by a list of all species planted on the enrolled field during the crop year and when those plantings occurred. So this includes, but is not limited to, their cash crop, their cover crop mixes, perennial plantings and ground cover, forage, trees, and shrubs. So whenever there's a planting occurring on one of the fields enrolled in the Star Plus program, we need to know what species are being planted there. And again, you can send that in when you submit for reimbursement. In a lot of cases last year, the species that they were planting were the species they were asking for reimbursement on the seed. Which is fine, but if they plant ones that they're not asking for reimbursement on the seed, we would like to know about those ones as well. And then this is just a general reimbursement note here. There will be no reimbursement for pesticides or the costs associated with pesticide applications. That does not mean that they can't apply insecticides and herbicides on their enrolled fields, but do not include them in your request for reimbursement. If you do, we'll turn them back. So now I'm going to go through some specific practice examples, and we'll just start with the initial consultation and enrollment period. And this one I'm going to go through here is for cover cropping. So let's say a producer has a field that is fallow between their cash crop harvest and their spring planting for the next season. This is the field they'd like to enroll in Star Plus. The producer would like to experiment with some type of cover during this fallow period so that they will have a living root in the ground longer and to armor their soil from erosion. And I highlighted living root and armor their soil because those are the two principles of soil health that this practice they want to implement is going to be touching on. So so we know why they want to do this cover crop. That's the justification of how it affects their soil health. So the living root and armoring their soil. And then how would the implementation work if this scenario is playing out? The conservation district and entity will work with the producer to help them determine which species they will plant and the best method or timing of the plantings. And there will be technical assistance providers available to assist with this technical implementation. So if you don't know much about cover crops, or when the best time to plant them is, or the methods of planting, or the species that people could try, you'll be able to seek assistance from technical assistance providers for that. For the next 3 crop years, the producer will experiment with these different seed mixes, ratios, planting dates, and methods of planting. They can make changes to their plantings each year, but they must stick with the original cover crop practice. So again, during the enrollment, when they're choosing their 1 or more practices, they need to be committing to those practices for 3 years. And they can tweak those practices, because what we want them to do is experiment here and find the best way to implement these practices on their farm or ranch. But they do need to stick with the original practice, even though they make those tweaks. So we go from the before picture here with the field of corn with the stubble, to the after picture, which is a field that I visit frequently that has a corn, and it's usually corn after corn after corn. And in between their corn crops, they are growing a winter cover to armor that soil and keep living roots in the ground, to help them with nutrient cycling, etc. So what would be reimbursable costs for this practice example? Their seed bill. So the receipts, there would be receipts required for that. So any seeds they planted, we'd need receipts for what they had from the seed company. Any time associated with that seeding, and that time will be determined by CSU custom rates. And if you go into the CSU custom rates for 2022, there is seeding specific rates per acre. Anytime associated with STAR Plus paperwork and meetings. So anytime they spend meeting with you or with technical assistance providers, or filling out their field evaluation forms in the spring, or working to take their soil samples, all that time is they can bill that per CSU custom rates and submit it for reimbursement. Their mileage, which is determined by the state controller's office at $0.59 per mile, so 59 cents per mile. They do have to use the 2-wheel drive mileage reimbursement rate, but it is still fairly generous. Any costs associated with mechanical termination. So if they have to terminate that cover crop at any point before they plant their new crop or their cash crop, they can submit costs associated with that termination, but they cannot, again, submit chemical termination costs. Any educational classes or courses related to soil health. So if the producer wants to do this cover cropping and they see a chance to take a course on cover crops from Green Cover Seed or CSU or some entity that's offering courses, then they can submit receipts for that class, and we will also consider that for reimbursement. And then things to remember as non-reimbursable costs: any costs associated with water, including irrigation systems improvements, water leases, or water purchases, are non-reimbursable costs. Their fertilizer application. So if they had to apply fertilizer with their cover crop, which sometimes people do, it's not that common, but sometimes it happens. Unless they chose nutrient management up front as a secondary or another practice, then they cannot submit fertilizer costs. However, if they did choose multiple practices and one of them is nutrient management, and the nutrient management is necessary for them to implement their new soil health practice, and they can justify that it is tied to their soil health practices, then they can submit it. And then any type of pesticide applications are non-reimbursable. Here is what it's going to actually look like when they go to do the submittal. There will be the reimbursement form, which we're going to provide to you folks, and I'll show you on the next screen. All the supporting receipts and a list of all the species planted, since this was a planting on their enrolled field during the crop year. And the email reimbursement form and supporting documents would go to the soils email, cda_soil@state.co.us. So this is an example reimbursement form for the scenario I just went through with the cover cropping. So you can see here, this person went to the CSU custom rates, and they looked on the eastern region because this took place out on the eastern plains. And they went to the planting row of 30-inch spacing, and they took the amount provided by CSU and came up with $2,000 for their reimbursement cost for planting the cover crop, which was a price per acreage on that CSU list. And they used the high level labor rates for that. Their mileage, so this person drove approximately 100 miles, drove to the FSA office, drove planting the cover crop in the field, and drove to pick up seed. And so they submitted that for $59. Then we have their cover crop seeds. So this is the seed itself for the cover crop. And it looks like they purchased 40 bags of seed at $30 a bag, which came out to $1,200. And they've put, please see attached receipt. So each spot where we need a receipt, they have the receipt there. Machine rental. So this person had to go and rent a machine to do the planting. They must not have had the drill. They rented it for $300 a day and did it for 4 days. So that's another $1,200. Their STAR paperwork, time, meetings, and consultations. They used the high level general labor for that, which is $20 an hour. And they estimated they spent about 8 hours at this, which was $160. This person attended a soil health class and attached the tuition form. That class was for 2 days, and it was $500 for both days. So they submitted for $500. And then their soil health class time. So they charged time too for the time they were in there. It was 16 hours of time at $20 an hour, which came to $320. So you can see down here at the bottom, the total match to be claimed, and all this is added up, was $5,439. They get a 1-to-1 reimbursement. So we're basically reimbursing 50% of that. So the match to be awarded to this producer after this submittal would be $2,719.50. So that's what they would get back. So on to the second practice example. So this one's prescribed grazing. Again, during the initial consultation and enrollment period, the producer is experiencing pasture degradation and inefficient use of forage, or the producer wants to implement livestock in areas where they have not been present. So there's implementing livestock as the first soil health principle that they're wanting to touch on there. The producer would like to create or improve a grazing management plan and would like to monitor grazing events to increase species diversity and armor their soil. And again, those are two of our soil health principles. So how would the implementation work here? The conservation district or entity would work with the producer to design and implement a grazing plan and to enhance pasture condition through monitoring, with examples like photo points, stubble height after grazing, etc., and record keeping. And again, technical assistance providers are available to assist with this technical implementation. For the next 3 years, 3 crop years, the producer would experiment with different grazing strategies. They can make changes to their grazing plans each year, but again, they must stick with the original prescribed grazing practice. And here is just a picture of some paddocks, grazed and new. So what would be the reimbursable costs in this prescribed grazing scenario? Time associated with moving livestock within the management area. Again, that's determined by CSU custom rates. Any time associated with STAR paperwork and meetings. Mileage determined by the state controller's office at 59 cents per mile. Supplemental feed. So let's say that they have made, they've decided they're going to keep their animals on their fields for less time. And at the end of the season, this means they're going to have supplementally feed more than they would have regularly fed. that additional supplemental feeding that was increased by implementing this new practice, we can pay for. So we can pay for the hay that is needed there. And then we're going to need a receipt for that hay. And then all costs associated with virtual fencing. So if this person decided to use virtual fencing instead of hot wiring or cross fencing, then we would need a receipt for the virtual fencing materials. So the towers and collars, all that stuff could be receipts for reimbursement. And then their custom rates for, they can use CSU custom rates for the time it takes them to implement that virtual fencing. Even like putting on the collars can be pretty time consuming and things like that. And then any educational classes, again, or courses related to soil health, and we would need a receipt for that class. Non-reimbursable fences or non-reimbursable costs, again, any costs associated with water. This would include livestock watering in the scenario that has livestock here, irrigation system improvements, water leases, and water purchases. And then also non-reimbursable costs in this scenario would be traditional fencing supplies, unless they also chose the fencing practice, which is a non-existing practice or non-exempt practice. So if they choose fencing and non-exempt, they can get funds for exterior fencing and cross fencing. However, choosing one non-exempt practice makes all the practices non-exempt, meaning they would now have to go through the CPA 52 process for the fencing and for the prescribed grazing, which is an exempt practice on its own. And then submittal for reimbursement, this is what they would submit. They submit the reimbursement form and all supporting receipts. And it would look like this. So in this scenario, we have moving cattle from paddock to paddock. And it looks like they're going for general labor for the high level labor rate, which is a median of $20 an hour for the Eastern Plains. 1 hour a day, 7 days a week for 8 months that it took them to, say, move hot wires or something in the field. Now, I might just point out they still can cross fence and hot wire and all that stuff when they're doing the prescribed grazing. Just we're not going to contribute to the funds for the purchase of that material unless they also go through the fencing practice. I hope that makes sense to everybody. But for the time it took to this person to move, 1 hour a day to move their animals from paddock to paddock for every day of the week for 8 months, they're asking for $4,480 in reimbursement. They had some mileage, so they had miles driven to different management areas and for picking up feed and for feeding for $118 they're submitting there. Their STAR paperwork, time, meetings, and consultations, $20 an hour, and they're estimating 8 hours for that. And then their feed hay, and they submitted a $4,000 bill here for feed hay and have attached a receipt. So in this scenario, they're submitting $8,758 with the one-to-one match, with us providing the 50%. The awarded amount would be $4,379. So in the final example I'm going to give here is for multiple practices. And this is going to be if the person decided to implement, say, a cover crop for that winter cover and livestock to graze the cover crop once it is established. Both of these practices would be CPA 52 exempt. And in this scenario, the producer wants a winter cover to keep a living root in the ground longer and to armor their soil from erosion. The producer would like to implement livestock to graze this winter cover once it is established. And it would look something like this. Here's a cover crop being grazed by cattle. So in this scenario, we've basically combined those two other reimbursement forms. We have the producer moving the cattle from paddock to paddock. We have their mileage, which they had to pick up feed, seeding, drive to get the feed, do the actual seeding itself, or drive to get the seed, do the actual seeding itself, all those things. And so they've combined them. and their star paperwork time, which we only have 1 8-hour period of time here instead of doubling that up, because it's probably not necessary for them to do. They wouldn't have to do twice the paperwork, even though they're doing 2 different practices. Their feed hay, their row planting for the cover crop, their cover crop seed, the one soil health class the person attended for the cover cropping, and the labor that they had associated with that. So in this scenario, they're submitting a reimbursement for $13,337, which is going to max them out at the $5,000 amount. So I guess I wanted to show this combined one. If the practice they want to do is they're choosing one practice and they know it's going to be hard to reach that 5,000 per year for reimbursement share, then they might consider implementing 2 practices, which they can combine their costs and get up to that maximum reimbursement amount. So now very quickly here, Nikki is going to talk about contract updates and capacity payments and give us an update on that. Take it away, Nikki.
Okay, thanks. I know this is a lot of information coming at you, so I'll try to keep this very short for those conservation districts or entity who have experience working with the state, and specifically the Department of Ag. Typically, we operate on annual purchase orders or contracts and keep grant awards up to just 1 year. However, we were able to get approved actual 4-year contracts, meaning that the information that you all will be receiving will have not only the details and the annual timeline of what is due each year and when, but it will also have the breakdown of budget and information of awards and funds that will be available to you. So these are on a reimbursement basis besides the initial capacity support and equipment grant, but the rest will be on a reimbursement basis based off of either consultation, check-in, or producer match forms. So again, these will be coming out the next couple of weeks, as John said. Since they are contracts, I just wanted to warn the conservation districts, because I don't think you all have received those for some time, is that there is a lot more pages of terms and conditions. So they're pretty big. They're going to be like 50 pages long. Really what it gets down to is the scope of work. All the rest of it is kind of the legal jargon that comes with the state contract anyhow. But if you have any questions, as John said, I believe August 7th, we will be having and going through those contracts. They will require signatures at this time. The biggest key that I wanted to point out, and we will also be sending clarification emails, is that in these contracts, if you can see that table on the left, the all white table, that is what is in your contract. And it's just the basic bulk amount for all 4 years. So you'll see the second line is annual capacity payment. It says $2,000 a producer annually for 4 years, so up to $80,000. That's obviously some wiggle room if you don't have 10 the first year, or you're at 9, or you do have 10, what is available that year for all 4 years. The same is for producer incentive payments. It will list based on how many producers you have, and it will be an up to amount. Obviously, that varies depending on acreage, and as John just went through, what they claim for match. Kind of the colored table on the right with all the different shades of color, and it breaks down each year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. That is the actual annual budget. So just to give you all a different perspective on looking at them, is that yes, you'll see that original white table, and that's your budget for the entire 4 years, up to like $276,000 for all of those that are in part of the new Climate Smart Commodities Award. But the table on the right just breaks that down by year a little cleaner for you. So if you have any questions, definitely let us know. Raquel is out today, but she will be sending out an email document that will have your Exhibit A budget straight from your contract, that entire white table, and we will have your specific tied annual yearly breakdown in that color table as an explanation for you for notes. So again, email us at that cda_soil@state.co.us, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. And I think that's it.
Great, thanks, Nikki.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did have one more thing on there. I got too excited. I wanted to let you all know that we're considering the district general fund budgets that are due at the end of this year. So for your initial capacity payment of $20,000, typically we send that out the minute we get the signed contract back from you. But what we did want to make aware is that for the conservation districts, some of you have smaller budgets, and that may trigger you to have to amend your budget this year with the Department of Local Affairs and Division of Local Government. So in order to kind of not mess that up, we are going to be asking if you would like us to hold that initial $20,000 payment and distribute it in January 2024. That will allow your district to include it in next year's budget that you'll start working on in the next few months, around October. So that's really up to you all. But we will be asking in the email that Raquel sends out with the budget explanations, which your district prefers. One, to pay immediately when the signed contract, or two, if you would like us to hold that initial big chunk and pay it in January 2024, we're happy to do so. Okay, I promise that's it.
That's great. Great information. So you can have that initial chunk held over to not mess up your budget if you would prefer. So I threw quite a bit out there to everyone. Do we have any questions here before we wrap up, or any clarifying?
I have a quick question. It's Marissa.
Yep.
So I know that you, and I apologize because I've been out of the country for the last 2 meetings, so I will be watching those. But when you said that no weed management is included, which I understand, but what can these producers, let's say on this practice, they get weed management on their own, and I give them cost share. That's coming from the state, so it's not a federal monies, or right. I just want to make sure it's kosher.
As long as you're not using as long as they are not receiving the funds from us to do the weed management, then they can still do it, and you can still pay for it. It just can't be our funds.
Most of the time, it's not STAR funding, but it would be most of the time my cost share comes from my matching grants. So if I get matching grants from CSCB, I just want to know if I'm double dipping. I just want clarification on that.
You would be fine.
Okay. All right.
The only case where it would be double dipping is if you're using federal funds to pay for the same practices we are paying for. So if you're not, even if so any funds you're using for practices we're not paying for, so like pesticide application, that would not be double dipping. Now, okay, if you paid them additional money for cover cropping that we're also paying for cover cropping on the same field, that's double dipping. The point here is that we don't want pesticide receipts and stuff sent to us for reimbursement, because we were not approved to do pest management in our grant.
Okay.
Does that clear it up?
Yep.
All right.
Yep. I just wanted to, know ahead of time. So that's good.
Yep.
Thanks.
Any other questions? And again, you can feel free to email us at the email address on the screen, or give me a call or contact us any way you'd like. And if you have specific questions, and then please mark your calendars on August 7th. We're going to be having that question and answer session, and you can bring all your good questions to that meeting. I hope this has been informative and more clear than mud. It was a little bit technical, but again, feel free to contact us if you need clarification or have further thoughts or questions. Looks like Penny asking, when do the contracts have to be returned, signed? Nikki, do you have, you want to jump in with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have the answer for that at this point, Penny. I do have a meeting with our contract person this afternoon. Apparently, there will be the opportunity for you all to review the drafts before you receive the final version to sign, but I don't know what the timeline of when we have to have those back to get you the contracts to sign. and then the deadline for that. But I will make sure and ask that and try to get some clarification on that. So thank you, Penny.
And then Neva says, can you send out a list of the practices? There will be a list of the practices in the grant guidelines of all the approved practices. Which ones are on the exempt list and which ones are on the non-exempt list. So that those grant guidelines will come with your contract and they'll be in there.
I do want to throw out there that a penny for the timeline on the contracts. We will definitely try to make sure it's at least a month to hopefully align with board meetings. So I will keep that in mind too.
And yep, Greg's saying they're in the ones we already sent out for people to review before that last webinar. So there is a list of guidelines in there. And this today is recorded and we'll have it on our website and on our YouTube channel. So you should be able to go back and review it if you have questions or want to listen to it one more time before you submit questions. So. All right, we're getting near the top of the hour. If we don't have any other questions, we could go ahead and adjourn. Going once, going twice. Well, thank you everybody for listening in, and we look forward to seeing you on August 7th for the question and answer session.